A single father looks at his own reflection and does not recognize himself, not because he lost money, not because he lost power, but because he lost the one thing no contract can protect, the ability to trust another person. His name is Roberto. He is 42 years old, born in East Los Angeles to parents who came from Jalisco with nothing but 2 suitcases and a determination that never faded. Roberto had built something rare, a cybersecurity and artificial intelligence company that changed how corporations in California protected their data. He did not sell technology. He sold control, clarity, and safety to businesses that had none of those things. But inside his own home, none of those 3 things existed either. The divorce had taken 11 months, and parts of himself he still wasn't sure would come back. The custody of his son, Mateo, 7 years old, stayed with him, and that was the only victory that mattered. The depression did not arrive with a flag or a warning. It came disguised as exhaustion, as silence in meetings, as dinners where he sat across from his son and felt nothing but a hollow space behind his chest. Therapy helped slowly. Sleep returned. Laughter returned in small amounts, just enough so Mateo would not notice the size of the emptiness. But trust never came back. And Roberto, standing in his bathroom mirror on a Tuesday morning, decided it was time to do something that most people would call foolish. Something that would either break him completely or give him back something real. Welcome to Addictive Stories. Roberto did not wake up one morning and decide to lie. The lie arrived slowly, the way fog arrives over the San Gabriel Mountains. Quietly, without announcement, until suddenly you cannot see what was in front of you. It started as protection. Then it became habit. Then it became the only way he could breathe without feeling the full weight of his own name. He had been married for 4 years to a woman named Valeria. They met at a technology conference in downtown Los Angeles. She was a consultant, sharp, articulate, the kind of woman who walked into a room and made people pay attention without raising her voice. Roberto fell for the rhythm of her, for the way she moved through a crowd like she already owned everything in it. They married 2 years after they met. Mateo was born in the 3rd year, and it was when Mateo turned 2 years old that Roberto found the messages, not through a detective, not through a friend, through a cell phone left face up on the kitchen counter, a notification that lit the screen at the wrong moment, and a sentence he spent the next 3 years trying to unread. Valeria had not only been unfaithful, she had been planning. There were conversations about assets, about timing, about how the marriage had been, from the very beginning, a strategy. Roberto did not scream. He did not break anything. He sat in the kitchen chair for 40 minutes without moving, with his son sleeping in the next room and the world continuing outside like nothing had happened. The divorce process lasted 11 months and cost him money, energy, and pieces of himself he still could not name or locate. But the custody of Mateo stayed with him, and that single fact carried him through the months when nothing else did. The depression that followed was not dramatic. There were no breakdowns in parking lots, no scenes at the office. It was quieter than that. It was the absence of color in things that used to have it. His therapist, a calm man named Dr. Fuentes, who worked out a small office in Pasadena, called it grief response, not for the relationship, but for the illusion Roberto had built around it. Roberto did not cry much. He went empty instead, and empty was harder to explain to anyone than tears would have been. Slowly, over many months, therapy opened space. He began sleeping again without the help of anything. He began eating dinner with Mateo without checking his phone every 3 minutes. He began laughing again, not often, but enough. What did not return was a capacity to trust a stranger. Friends tried to set him up. His company generated visibility, and visibility generated interest. Women appeared at dinners already knowing exactly who he was, what he had built, what his name represented in certain circles. Roberto would go. He would sit down and listen and respond. But there was always a moment, always, when something shifted. A question about investments disguised as curiosity. A comment about the company that was slightly too informed. And he would close, not dramatically, just close. And the evening would end politely. After the 5th dinner that ended with him sending a polite message the next morning and then disappearing, Roberto had an idea. It was simple, almost embarrassing in its simplicity. But he needed something that would cut through the noise before anyone sat down at a table with him. He started going out without the car, without the watch, without anything that carried a brand name visible enough to mean something. A plain dark jacket, jeans, clean sneakers with no logo. When people asked what he did for work, he said he worked in IT, which was technically true, and that he was freelancing, that he was in a transitional phase. The stories vary depending on the night and the person, but the principle stayed the same. Remove the name from the equation and see what remained. What remained was less, not because the people he met were bad people, but there was a noticeable difference in how conversations moved without the weight of his last name in the room. Without it, he became less interesting in a very specific way. The conversations changed tone. Some became lighter and more honest. Others simply went nowhere. Roberto observed all of it with an attention he had not realized he had developed. He was becoming a student of human behavior in the most personal laboratory possible, his own life. Mateo knew his father went out sometimes. At 7 years old, the questions he asked were different ones. Whether he could have more dessert, whether the weekend would include the park near Abuela's house, whether his father would sleep early enough so they could watch a movie together. It was on a Tuesday morning in March, in a neighborhood near their apartment in Monterey Park, that Roberto was walking with Mateo before dropping him at school. A short walk, part of a new routine his therapist had suggested, something to get both of them outside without the pressure of a destination. Mateo stopped. Across the street, a woman in an orange vest was sweeping the sidewalk. Her movements were steady, deliberate, without unnecessary hurry. She was not looking at anyone. She was simply doing the work with a focus that had its own kind of dignity. An older man walking past bumped into the side of her cart. Whether by accident or carelessness, Roberto could not tell. The man did not stop or apologize. He kept walking. The woman adjusted her equipment, picked up what had fallen, and continued as if the interruption had not happened. Mateo looked up at his father. She did not get angry. Roberto looked at her again across the street. He did not know what to say, so he said only she did not. Why? Mateo asked. Roberto had no answer that fit into something a 7-year-old could hold. He just watched her for a few more seconds as she continued working, and there was something in her steadiness, in the way she simply kept going without needing the moment to be acknowledged, that he could not name but also could not dismiss. They walked on. Roberto dropped Mateo at school, gave him the usual hug at the gate, and on the way back home, he passed the same street without planning to. She was still there on the same block. This time, something went wrong with the cart. One of the wheels caught in a crack in the asphalt, and the force she applied to free it caused the cart to tilt, spilling part of its contents onto the sidewalk. A bag split open. She stood still for 1 second, took a breath, and began collecting what had fallen. Roberto stopped walking, without thinking very much about it. He walked toward her. "Can I help?" he asked. She looked at him. Brown eyes, direct expression, not suspicious, not surprised, just direct. "I am fine," she said. "I know," he said, but the bag split. She considered this for a moment, then gave a small nod. The two of them collected what had spilled. It took no more than 3 minutes. When they finished, she straightened the cart and tested the wheel with her foot. "Thank you," she said simply. "Of course," he answered. She went back to sweeping. Roberto stood still for a moment he could not explain. There was nothing extraordinary happening. A woman doing her job, a man who helped for a minute. But there was something in how she had said thank you, without extra weight, without analysis, the way a person says it simply because it is what you say when someone helps, and nothing more. No performance in it. No reading of a situation to determine what response would land best. Just the words, plain and clean. He walked away with a strange feeling of having found something, without yet knowing what it was. Her name was Carmen. She was 38 years old, born in the Boyle Heights neighborhood of Los Angeles, to parents originally from Oaxaca. She had grown up watching her mother clean other people's houses, and her father worked 2 jobs at the same time, never complaining, never explaining to their children why rest was something that came later. Carmen had learned early that the world does not reorganize itself to accommodate your exhaustion. You organize yourself inside it and keep moving. She woke up every morning at 4:30. Not because she loved the silence of early hours, but because the job required it, and she had learned a long time ago that arguing with reality was the longest road to nowhere. Quick coffee, orange vest, rubber boots, the bus at 5:10. 5 years doing the same route. 5 years hearing the same sound of the broom against the pavement, the same scrape of rubber on concrete, the same quiet street still dark and empty, making room for the coming day. She knew every section of her zone, the way you know your own apartment. She knew where the asphalt dipped, where the wind pushed debris in the wrong direction, where traffic was heaviest in the late morning. Most of her co-workers said it was easier to become invisible, that the less you expected to be seen, the less it hurt when you weren't. Carmen understood the logic. She simply could not live by it. She had tried. The invisibility never fit quite right, like a coat sewn for someone else's shoulders. There was a specific Tuesday that Carmen stored without meaning to, the way certain moments stick before you understand why they matter. The sun had not yet warmed the air properly when a man walked past her without adjusting his path, without slowing down, and dropped a crushed aluminum can less than 1 foot from where she was standing. It was not carelessness. There was space on the sidewalk. Plenty of it. It was the kind of small decision some people make, without registering that they made one. He did not look back. Carmen stood still for a moment. She looked at the can, then looked in the direction the man had gone, then bent down, picked it up, and dropped it into the cart. Across the street, a man in a dark jacket stopped walking. She did not notice him immediately. She only noticed when she turned to push the cart forward and saw that he was still there on the opposite sidewalk, watching the direction where the other man had disappeared, with an expression she could not quite categorize. It was not pity. It was something closer to restrained anger, the kind that lives quietly behind a calm face when someone knows that what just happened was wrong, but also knows that naming out loud in that moment would cost more than it would gain. When his eyes met hers, he looked away quickly and kept walking. Carmen turned back to her work. The morning continued the way mornings do, indifferent to the small moments happening inside them, with or without witnesses. Roberto had seen everything. He had been passing through that block without a specific reason, or at least that was what he told himself. The truth was that he had returned to that street 3 times since the morning of the spill cart. No plan, just passing through. And every time she was there, that particular morning, he stayed longer than he should have. What held him was not her specifically, or not only her. It was the contrast that nobody around her seemed to notice. People passed the cart the way they pass a pothole, as an obstacle to navigate around, not as a person to acknowledge. No good morning from anyone. No small nod. Some crossed to the other side of the sidewalk before they even reached her, as if the orange vest occupied more space than the body wearing it. There was a woman who pulled her bag to the other shoulder as she passed the cart, an automatic gesture. She probably did not even register doing it. There was a young man on a bicycle who honked because the cart was briefly in the bike lane, while Carmen maneuvered around a parked truck. 2 seconds, maybe 3. And there was a man with a can, who had simply decided that the ground near her feet was the appropriate place for his trash. Roberto stood there thinking about how many times he had moved through his own life without seeing what was happening at the edges of it. Not because he was cruel, but because the world teaches you to look at what is at eye level. And for a long time, his eyes had been somewhere else entirely. It was that same week that Mateo appeared in the story again in an important way. Roberto had taken his son for a late afternoon walk, another new routine the therapist had suggested, something to pull both of them out of the apartment without a specific destination attached to it. They were walking slowly through the neighborhood when Mateo stopped. Carmen was on the other side of the street, near the end of her shift, pushing the empty cart toward the collection point. Mateo waved. She saw him and smiled, quick, genuine, without ceremony. The kind of smile that children recognize before any adult can process what they're seeing. Mateo smiled back and kept walking as if this were the most natural thing in the world, because for him it was. Roberto looked at her for a moment longer. She had already turned, continuing on her way, and he realized something without being able to explain it fully. That smile had cost her nothing. No calculation, no hesitation. A child waved and she smiled and walked away. Simple as that. He went to sleep that night thinking about it more than he expected to. There was something in her that he still could not name. It was not beauty, though she was beautiful in her own way. It was not mystery. It was something quieter and more solid, like a structure that holds not because it was built to impress, but because it was built to last. And for the first time in a long while, he felt the weight of his own disguised differently, not as protection, as a debt. The month had been tight financially for Carmen. This was not new information. She had learned to live within a narrow margin with a precision that no spreadsheet or financial class could teach. It was the kind of math you learned through experience. Cutting this, moving that, reorganizing the numbers until they hurt a little less. But that particular month, the numbers did not close. A payment on her debt had gone up because of an adjustment she had not anticipated. A broken shower head had consumed what was left in her account, and the transit subsidy from her employer arrived 3 days late. 3 days that felt like 3 weeks when the balance said zero. It was her co-worker, a woman named Senora Patricia, 51 years old with 20 years on the job, who mentioned position first. "There's a company downtown hiring administrative assistants," she said. "They are accepting resumes in person. You have your high school diploma, right, Carmen?" She did. She also had a basic computer course she had completed at a community center 8 years ago, and 2 years of office experience at a small accounting firm before her mother got sick and everything changed direction. She went home, opened the document on her phone, adjusted what she could adjust, and printed it at the copy shop on her corner. The following morning, on her day off, she exchanged the orange vest for a white blouse she had pressed carefully and dark slacks she kept for occasions that asked more of her. The clothes were not expensive, but they were clean, pressed, and she wore them with her head up. Carmen took the bus to downtown Los Angeles. The address Senora Patricia had written down was on one of the most active avenues in the city, a glass and steel building that reflected the morning sky in a way that made it look like it was made of the same material as clouds. Carmen stopped on the sidewalk for a moment and looked at the front of the building. She read the name on the brushed metal sign above the entrance. She did not recognize it. She walked in. The lobby was cold, bright, and quiet in a way that only spaces with real money managed to be quiet. The floor reflected the ceiling lights. There was a curved reception desk in the center, 2 young women behind it, and a security guard standing on either side of the turnstile. Carmen walked to the reception desk. "Good morning," she said. "I am here to submit a resume. I saw that you have an open position for an administrative assistant." The receptionist looked at her. Not a long look. The kind of quick look that evaluates and files information before fully processing it. "Do you have an appointment?" "No." The announcement said in-person submission. No appointment required. That announcement is old. The receptionist said, returning to her screen. "Now we only accept applications through the online form." Carmen stood still. "Is the link available?" "I can access it right here if there is a terminal." "We do not have public terminals available." Next to her, the security guard had moved half a step closer. He had done nothing, just moved closer. Carmen breathed slowly and kept her face completely calm. "Is it all right if I leave the resume anyway?" Carmen asked, just to have it on record. The receptionist took the paper without looking at it and placed it under the counter with a gesture that made clear the paper would not travel beyond that spot. Then, from somewhere Carmen could not immediately identify, came a voice. A man in a suit passing behind the reception area with a folder under his arm, not stopping, not looking directly at her. "We already have a cleaning crew," he said. Silence. Carmen did not respond. She stood still, looking straight ahead, with a kind of quiet that is not weakness. It is a result of years of learning that certain battles cost more than they return. She had been in rooms like this before. She had stood in lines where people ahead of her were treated differently. She had applied for things and been told the position was no longer available by people who looked at her the way that man had just looked at her, as if the orange uniform she wore on other mornings had somehow followed her in. She was about to turn and leave when she heard quick footsteps coming from the side hallway. "Carmen!" She turned. A man was standing about 15 feet from her, in a dress shirt, without the dark jacket she had always seen him wearing, with an expression on his face she had not seen on him before. Not surprise. something closer to a person who's been caught and knows it. The lobby went quiet in a different way than before. Carmen looked at him. Then she looked at the sign she had read when she entered, but had not fully processed. Then she looked back at him and processed it completely. The name on the sign was one she had heard in passing conversations over the years, mentioned in discussions about technology, about successful companies, about the kind of achievement that seems too far away to be real. The face in the small frame photo on the side wall, one among several, all with the same controlled and serious expression that corporate portraits require, was his face. Not the man with the dark jacket, not the IT freelancer in a transitional phase, not the man who had helped her with the spilled cart and listened to her talk for 20 minutes on a park bench. The owner of all of this. She did not speak for a long moment. She simply looked at him with that same calm she had always carried. But this time the calm had a different weight. It was a calm of someone organizing many things at once on the inside. Roberto took one step toward her. "Carmen, I can explain. Not here," she said. Low, firm. He nodded. He looked at the security guard, at the receptionist, with a look that required no words, and pointed toward the hallway with his hand. They walked to a small room near the entrance. A table, 2 chairs, a window facing the parking structure outside. Nothing special. Roberto closed the door. Carmen remained standing, not for drama, simply because sitting felt like surrendering something she was not yet ready to give. "How long did you know?" she asked. Simple, direct, no accusation in her tone, which made the question heavier than any raised voice could have made it. "From the beginning," he said. He did not try to soften it. "You knew who you were." "I did not." "And you let it stay that way?" "I did." "Why?" Roberto was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of someone inventing an answer. The silence of someone who has the answer and already knows it is not enough. "Because I learned to distrust everyone who knew my name before they knew me. And you were the first person in a very long time who treated me like a person, without needing to know what I had." Carmen listened without interrupting. "I was not testing you," he continued. "At least not the way it looks. I just needed somewhere I could be only a person, without everything else attached to that. And you chose to be that person through a lie." There was no cruelty in the sentence, only precision. Roberto did not look away. "Yes." Carmen was quiet for a moment. She looked at the window, looked back at him. "I did not need money," she said. "I have payments. I have debt. I have months that are harder than others. But I have never asked for anything that was not true." She paused briefly. "And you knew that. You listened to everything I told you on that bench and said nothing." "I know. Then you understand why I need to leave now." It was not a question. It was a conclusion. Roberto opened his mouth, then closed it. There was much he wanted to say in that small room near the entrance of his own building. He wanted to explain the divorce. He wanted to explain Valeria and what she had taken, not just in legal terms, but in the quieter, harder-to-name ways. He wanted to explain what it feels like to sit across from someone new at a dinner table and spend the whole meal reading every word for the thing behind the word, checking every gesture for calculation behind the gesture. He wanted to explain what it cost him to stop doing that, and how rare it had been not to feel the need to do it when he was with her. But he looked at Carmen and understood that in that moment no explanation arrived before the hurt did. She picked up her bag from the chair, straightened her blouse, and walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the handle. She did not turn around, but she spoke. "I do not care what you have, Augusto." "Roberto," she corrected herself quietly. "I never did." A pause. "But I care about who a person is. And today I do not know." She opened the door and left. Roberto stayed in the room for a time he could not measure. The parking structure outside the window looked the same as it always did. Cars in numbered spaces, sunlight on warm asphalt. The world had not stopped. It never stops. He walked to the window and placed his hand against the cold glass. He had spent 2 years building a perfect protection, testing it, observing it, calculating every part of it. And he had still hurt someone who had not deserved to be hurt. He waited 2 days before going to find her, not because he was calculating the right moment, but because he needed to be sure that when he went, he was not going with an excuse. He was going with the truth. And truth takes time to organize when you have spent years carefully avoiding it. On the morning of the third day, Roberto woke before his alarm, made Mateo's breakfast, walked his son to school, and then continued on foot to the zone where Carmen worked. No car, no expensive watch, nothing that was not simply himself walking on a wide sidewalk in the early morning light of East Los Angeles. He found her on the second block, pushing the cart in the same steady rhythm he had come to recognize from a distance. She saw him from far away. She did not stop. She kept sweeping. Roberto reached her and stood about 6 feet from the cart, without blocking her path, without forcing anything. "I did not come to justify myself," he said. She did not respond. She continued sweeping. "I came because you deserve to hear the full story," he said. "Not the version I tell when I want to seem reasonable. The real version." Carmen stopped. She stood with her back to him for a moment, then turned, crossed her arms, and waited. Roberto breathed deeply. "I was married for 4 years to a woman who entered the marriage knowing exactly what she wanted from it. It was not companionship. It was assets. I found out late, the worst way possible. And when I found out, something in me broke in a way I still do not know is fully repaired." She listened without a defined expression, just listening. Roberto continued. "I went through a period of depression that lasted months. I could not be fully present anywhere, not at the office, not with my son. Therapy helped. Time helped. But what did not come back was the ability to trust someone who already knew who I was before meeting me." He paused. "So I started going out without the name, without the car, without the watch, without anything that identified what I had, to see what remained, to see if anyone stayed. And then you found me," she said. It was not an accusation, just the logical continuation. "And then I found you," he repeated. "And you were the first person in a long time who stayed, not because you did not know who I was, but because it simply did not seem to matter." Carmen stood quietly. "I should have said something sooner," he continued. "I know that. I knew it while it was happening. But I was afraid that once you knew everything, it would change, that you would start seeing me differently. And I did not want to lose the only space where I was just a person. You did not have the right to make that decision for me," she said. Low, firm. He met her eyes. "You are right." He did not look away. "And I am not here asking you to understand. I am asking for a chance to start honestly. No hiding, no testing, no disguise." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of everything that had been said, and the weight each word carried, and the distance between two people who had arrived at the same place by completely different roads. It was then that Mateo appeared. Roberto had arranged with the school for his son to be released a little early that morning. One of the few practical advantages of being a single father with a capable assistant who handled scheduling. Mateo came around the corner with his backpack on and his shoelaces untied as always, and stopped when he saw Carmen. He opened a wide smile. "You are the lady with the broom," he said. Carmen looked at him, and the smile that appeared on her face was the same as always. Quick, genuine, without ceremony. "That is me," she said. Mateo walked to her without hesitating and hugged her. Not the cautious hug of a child who does not know someone well. A full hug, the kind that belongs to a child who recognizes a good person without needing any explanation for the recognition. Carmen stood still for a second, then slowly placed her hand on his back. Roberto watched all of it without speaking. There was something in that moment that no argument could accomplish. The honesty of a child who does not calculate, who does not analyze, who simply feels something and acts on it without needing justification. Mateo had recognized Carmen from the first smile exchanged on the street. He did not know her name. He did not know anything about her story, but he had recognized her. Sometimes we recognize before we understand. Mateo went to play on a nearby bench the way children find occupation in any surface available. And Roberto and Carmen stood facing each other with a cart between them, and the street around them continuing its ordinary morning. "I do not care what you have," she said again, the same words she had used in the room near the lobby. But the tone was different now. "Less cut, more weight. I never did. But I need to know that the person standing in front of me is real, that what they say is what they are. That is what I want," he said. From now on, she looked at him for a long time. It was not distrust exactly. It was a look of someone who has learned not to decide quickly, because quick decisions have cost her before. "I do not know how this works," she said finally. "The difference between your life and mine is not small, Roberto. I know, and I am not going to pretend it does not exist." "Neither will I," he said. "Then what are you proposing?" He thought for a moment. "That we start from the beginning. For real this time. No character, no test. Just two people who found each other on a sidewalk and have not finished the conversation yet." The silence stretched a little longer. Then she looked to the side. She looked at Mateo, who was trying to balance his backpack on the very tip of the bench with a focus he rarely applied to homework. She looked back at Roberto and nodded. It was not a grand gesture. There was no music, no different light, no marker the world usually places on moments it wants to call important. Just a woman in an orange vest and a man in a plain dark jacket on an ordinary sidewalk, on an ordinary Los Angeles morning, deciding to try. Roberto took one step forward. Carmen did not step back. The kiss was brief and honest, the kind that does not need an audience because it is not for anyone watching. Mateo glanced over from the bench, made a face that communicated everything a 7-year-old communicates when he sees his father do something embarrassing, and went back to balancing his backpack. The street continued. The cart continued. The sun kept hitting the pavement the way it does on a normal Tuesday in Los Angeles, as if nothing extraordinary had happened, but something had. Because sometimes the extraordinary does not arrive with spectacle or announcement. It arrives quietly in the middle of an ordinary morning, when two people decide at the same time, without coordinating, that truth is worth more than protection, that starting again, even with fear, is better than standing still with one hand pressed against cold glass, watching an empty parking structure through a window. This is the story of a man who had everything except a reason to trust. A man who learned the hardest way that money attracts the wrong people, and that sometimes to find something real, you have to stop being who the world expects you to be. And this is the story of a woman who had very little in terms of what the world counts, and everything in terms of what the world cannot measure. Their roads were completely different. Their destination turned out to be the same sidewalk, on a Tuesday, in East Los Angeles, in a city full of people passing without seeing, and two people who finally stopped. 3 weeks after that morning on the sidewalk, Roberto and Carmen had their first real dinner together. No disguise, no version of himself edited for the occasion. He picked her up at her apartment in Lincoln Heights, a small second-floor unit she shared with her younger sister, Lorena, who was 26 and worked as a medical assistant. Carmen came down the stairs in a green dress that was simple and exactly right on her. Roberto noticed the way she moved in it, the same unhurried steadiness he had noticed the very first morning on the street. They went to a restaurant in Alhambra that his friend had recommended, a Mexican seafood place with good lighting and tables that were not too close together. He told her his full name for the second time, but this time without a building behind it, just a name. He told her about his parents, his father, Ernesto, who had come from Sonora and worked in construction until his knees gave out, and his mother, Graciela, who still lived in the same house in Montebello, where Roberto had grown up and who called every Sunday without fail. Carmen told him about her mother, Elena, who had passed 2 years before after 18 months of illness that had rearranged everything in Carmen's life. She did not speak about it with tragedy. She spoke about it the way she spoke about most things, directly, without needing the facts to be decorated. Roberto listened the way he had learned to listen with her, not waiting for the right moment to speak, not reading for hidden signals, just listening. Mateo met Carmen officially, meaning with conversation, not just a sidewalk hug, on a Saturday afternoon in April at a small park near Roberto's apartment in Monterey Park. It had been Roberto's idea, but he had asked Mateo first, the way he tried to ask Mateo about most things that concerned him. His son had answered with a directness that 7-year-olds use when they have already decided. She is a lady with a broom, right? I already know her. Carmen arrived with a bag that had 2 mangoes with chili and lime from a fruit stand on her corner. The kind of thing you bring when you do not want to arrive empty-handed, but also do not want to make something bigger than it is. Mateo took his mango and immediately began telling her about the video game he had been allowed to play for 30 minutes the previous night, a story that required significant detail and several reenactments. Carmen listened with the same fullness Roberto had noticed the first time she had listened to him, not performing interest, actually present. At one point, Mateo asked her if she liked her job. Carmen looked at him thoughtfully for a moment and said, "I like that it is mine, that I show up and I do it, and at the end of the day, the street is clean, because of something I did." Mateo considered this seriously. Roberto watched his son nod with a slow nod of someone deciding whether a new idea fits into the world they already understand. It fit. The debt Carmen had been carrying for 3 years, the one accumulated during her mother's illness, during the hospitalizations, the medications, the months she had reduced her hours to be present, was something Roberto learned about in pieces, the way you learn about the most important parts of a person, not in a single conversation, but across several. She never spoke about it looking for rescue. She spoke about it the way she spoke about everything difficult in her life, as a fact that required management, not a wound that required an audience. Roberto did not offer fix it, not immediately, not without being invited to. He understood, more than most people understood, that offering money without invitation was its own kind of imbalance. Instead, he listened, and when she mentioned, several weeks later, that she had looked into a refinancing option that would lower her monthly payment, but was uncertain about the paperwork, he asked if she would like him to look at it with her. Not for her. With her. She looked at him for a moment, and he could see her weighing it, the independence on one side and the practicality on the other. "Okay," she said finally, "but I'd do the paperwork. I just need another set of eyes." He nodded. They sat at her kitchen table on a Wednesday evening, while Lorena watched something on the television in the next room, and they went through the documents page by page. It took 2 hours. By the end, the monthly payment was going to decrease by $63. Carmen closed the folder and made coffee without saying anything more about it. Roberto's mother, Graciela, 70 years old, sharp as a woman half her age and direct in a way that only mothers who have raised difficult sons can be, met Carmen on a Sunday in May. Roberto had not planned a formal introduction. He had simply brought Mateo to his mother's house in Montebello for the usual Sunday lunch, and Carmen had come along because Mateo had asked her to, which made the decision simple. Graciela opened the door, looked at Carmen, looked at Roberto, looked back at Carmen, and said, "Come in, the food is ready." At the table, she asked Carmen the questions that mattered to her: where her family was from, what her mother had been like, whether she still went to church. Carmen answered all of them without deflecting. Her family was from Oaxaca. Her mother had been the hardest working and most patient person she had ever known. She went to church on Christmas and Holy Week, which she acknowledged was not exactly devout, but was honest. Graciela nodded at each answer with the specific nod of a woman, recording information for later use. After lunch, while Roberto and Mateo were in the backyard, Graciela sat with Carmen at the kitchen table over coffee and said he was not well for a long time. Carmen said, "I know." Graciela said, "He is better now." Carmen said nothing, just held the cup in both hands. Graciela looked at her for a long moment. "Good," she said, and changed the subject. It was the most complete approval she offered anyone. There were hard conversations. There were always going to be hard conversations with this much distance between two lives. The differences were not small, and neither of them pretended otherwise. Roberto lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in Monterey Park that he had chosen specifically to feel like a home and not a statement. But the office building existed. The company existed. The meetings and the conferences and the profile in a technology magazine published 2 years ago that Carmen found one evening while looking for something else entirely. She looked at the photo in the magazine for a long time, the formal version of the man she had come to know across park benches and morning sidewalks, and felt the strangeness of how much space existed between the two images. She showed it to Roberto the next time she saw him. He looked at it and said, "That was taken during the worst year of my life. I looked controlled because I had nothing else left to hold on to." Carmen looked at him. Then she set the magazine down and said, "The version of you I know is better." He asked, "Better how?" She thought for a moment. "More real," she said. Less armor. She was quiet for a second, but the armor made sense. I understand why you built it. I just needed to know that the person inside, it was who I thought he was. Roberto looked at her for a long time. He said, he is. She said, I know that now. The magazine stayed on the table between them, and neither of them picked it up again. By June, a routine had formed, quietly, without announcement, the way the best routines form. Saturdays belonged to the three of them when Carmen was not working. Mateo had appointed himself the official decision-maker regarding which park they went to, which he took seriously. Carmen brought fruit from the stand on her corner. Roberto made the coffee in a thermos because Carmen had mentioned once, without emphasis, that she thought thermos coffee tasted better on a warm morning than any cafe coffee did. He had remembered this without meaning to. One Saturday in mid-June, they were at Hollenbeck Park in Boyle Heights, close to where Carmen had grown up, when Mateo asked Carmen if she would teach him how she swept. She laughed. A real laugh. The kind Roberto had been collecting without realizing he was doing it. She looked around, found a large stick that had fallen from one of the trees near the path, and handed it to Mateo. Like this, she said, and showed him the movement, the angle of the arms, the direction of the stroke, working with the slope of the ground rather than against it. Mateo practiced with the seriousness of someone learning a skill that will matter. Passers-by looked at them. Roberto watched his son sweep a section of park path with a fallen branch, guided by a woman in regular clothes who had removed her orange vest, but not the steadiness that lived underneath it. He thought, this is what I was looking for. Not certainty. Just this. In July, Carmen was offered position as an administrative coordinator at a nonprofit organization in El Sereno that worked with youth programs in the neighborhood. The offer came through a contact she had made at a community event months earlier, long before she had ever spoken to Roberto. The salary was modest, but higher than what she earned currently. The hours were regular. The work was connected to something she cared about. She told Roberto about it on a Thursday evening at her kitchen table. He listened to her walk through the details, the pros, the things she was uncertain about, the way it would change her morning schedule. Then she said, I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly, not helpfully. He looked at her. She said, Did you have anything to do with this offer? Roberto met her eyes. He said, No. She held his gaze for a moment. He said, I know what that question means, Carmen. I know what it would mean if the answer were yes. The answer is no. She nodded. Then she said, Good, because I worked for this. He said, I know you did. She accepted the position 2 days later. On the morning, she submitted her resignation at the city sanitation department. She went to work one final time in the orange vest, completed her route from start to finish, returned the equipment with the same care she always had, and left as she had arrived, with her head up and everything in order. Mateo turned 8 years old in August. Roberto planned a birthday party the same way he approached most things involving his son, by asking Mateo what he wanted and then making it happen within reason. What Mateo wanted was a small party at Abuela Graciella's house in Montebello with a chocolate cake, his two best friends from school, and Carmen. Roberto relayed this to Graciela, who said only, Tell me how many people, and I will handle food. Carmen arrived early with Lorena and helped set up the folding tables in the backyard. Graciela put her to work without ceremony. Cut that, stir this, move that over there, which Carmen understood immediately as the most direct form of acceptance available in that household. Mateo wore a shirt with a dinosaur on it and spent most of the party explaining dinosaur facts to anyone who would stand still long enough to listen. At one point, he stood between Roberto and Carmen, one hand in his father's hand and one hand in Carmen's, watching his friends run across the yard, and said nothing, just stood there. Roberto looked down at his son. Then he looked at Carmen. She was already looking at him. No words, no gesture, just a backyard, the noise of children, Graciella's voice in the kitchen, and that moment, small and complete and enough. Roberto and Carmen did not rush. They had both arrived at that sidewalk carrying enough history to know that rushing was how important things got damaged. They moved slowly, with intention, checking in with each other the way people do when they have learned that assumption is more expensive than communication. There were Friday evenings when Roberto came to her apartment, and they sat at her kitchen table talking until midnight, which was late for people who both woke up early, and neither of them noticed until the silence between their senses grew comfortable enough to feel like rest. There were mornings when he brought Mateo to her neighborhood, and they walked. No destination, just walking, the three of them on sidewalks she had swept and knew by the angle of their drainage and the way the light fell on them at different hours. Mateo had questions about everything. Carmen answered the ones she could and said simply, "I do not know," for the ones she could not, which Mateo found satisfying the way children find honesty satisfying when they have been raised on it. Roberto watched all of it. He had spent years building an architecture of protection around himself. He had tested it carefully and maintained it at cost to everything else, and it had protected him from nothing important while keeping him far from everything real. He was not going to make that mistake again. Not with her. Not with this. On addictive stories, stories like this remind us that the most honest moments of a life are usually the smallest ones. This story is built from fictional people on real streets, but the reflection it holds is not fictional. Roberto is every person who built walls after being broken by someone who treated love as a transaction. Carmen is every person the world has chosen not to see, who worked in plain sight and remained invisible because the world looks at eye level and she was somehow always just below it. Mateo is every child who has not yet learned to hesitate, who walks toward what feels right without needing a reason to be written down first. The distance between their lives was real. The differences did not disappear because they stood on the same sidewalk, but they decided, both of them, without rehearsing it, that truth was worth more than comfort, that a real beginning, even a complicated one, was better than protected loneliness. If you have ever been treated differently because of what you were wearing, or what job you were doing, or what neighborhood you came from, this story is for you. If you have ever been the person who walked past the orange vest without seeing the person inside it, this story is also for you. Share it with someone who has been judged without deserving it. Leave a comment telling us about a moment when you were seen, really seen, by someone who had no reason to stop. And remember, sometimes the most extraordinary thing that will ever happen to you arrives on an ordinary Tuesday morning, on a sidewalk you have swept 1,000 times, looking like nothing at all.